Hello and welcome to the next session in today's Banking Revolution conference. For the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be discussing the banking needs of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. These businesses, which are crucial to the global economy, are badly served by the banking system. Today, we'll be discussing what can be done to bridge this banking gap. My name is Owen Walker, and I am the European banking correspondent at the Financial Times. Before we begin, I would like to remind our audience you can ask questions throughout our panel using the Q&A chat box on your screen. Feel free to share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag #BankingRevolution. This morning, I am joined by an esteemed panel for what I expect to be a fascinating discussion. Now, we have had some initial technical difficulties. Our first panelist, Jason Oakley, who is Chief Executive of Recognised Bank, isn't currently with us. Hopefully, he'll be able to tune in at some point during the session. Recognise is the UK's newest lender, which specialises in working with SMEs. But we are very much joined by Liz Barclay, who is the UK's Small Business Commissioner, who is head of an independent public body set up to tackle late and unfavourable pay in the private sector. And we're also joined by Liliana Pozzo, who is Advisory Services Regional Leader in the Financial Institutions Group for LATAM and Europe at the International Finance Corporation. Thank you all for joining me today. Liz and Liliana, I'd like to start by asking you the same question, just to kind of get your initial thoughts on the subject. And it is, what are the biggest obstacles to making the banking system work for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises? You both do a lot of work in this area. It'd be great to hear your thoughts. Liz, maybe starting with you.
Thank you very much indeed, Owen, and thank you for inviting me. I would say, first of all, that I'm on a one-woman crusade to get us to stop using the term SMEs, because I think that we lump together the small, the micros, the sole traders, and the mediums, and actually the needs of all of those are very, very different. The micro and sole traders and small firms with up to 50 employees that I am trying to help get better payments and faster payments are probably the ones which are most likely to find it hard to find funding. The mediums in the main have got financial controllers and departments that can help them navigate the many sources of funding out there and help them navigate the processes that the banks put in place. So that's the first thing I think that I would say. The small and micros and sole traders have a different mindset. And I know this because I'm not a banker, but I certainly have been a freelance worker for most of my career. And I know we're a different beast. We have a different mindset. We're so busily coming up with ideas, being creative. We love working flexibly. We haven't got time to wade through the masses and masses of information that's out there about the various sources of funding, etc. And of course, we don't have the money to hire in the people with that all of that knowledge. We also are pretty bad at, when it comes to getting business advice, paying for business advice. We look for free advice, and sometimes it's not always the right advice. So ultimately, we go to the bank, and if the bank doesn't come forth with the money that we need, then we sometimes withdraw without going that next step further that we should do. There are practical barriers, there are detailed business plans, there's rigid lending criteria, there's the ongoing application process, the long decision-making processes. And sometimes we simply can't navigate that. So there are, 5.6 million small businesses with 5.6 million different sets of needs. And so far in this job, which I took over on the 1st of July, I've talked to most of the big banks, I've talked to lots of the challengers, and there is an admission and a realization out there, especially amongst the traditional banks, that they don't fully understand the smallest of their customers. They're more risk averse, and so their smallest customers are harder for them to engage with. There are so many of them, harder for them to understand because I say there are those 6.5 million different stories and different scenarios to really get to grips with. And small businesses want relationships. And the big banks traditionally have been moving away from that high street relationship too.
Okay, great. Thanks, Liz. Some really interesting thoughts and plenty of stuff to get into in this session. Lineal, what's your initial thoughts on those obstacles?
Thank you, Owen, and thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel. And Liz, I'm going to join you in your one woman crusade to stop lumping the MSME so we can be the two women crusade. And not only that, right? So listing a few of the challenges, informality is one of them, and it really depends on the size of the business, as Liz said. Business skills and how to grow the business is another challenge, because at the end of the day, a business is really focused on that business. So if you're a seamstress or whatever, a cook, a chef, you're really focused on your skill and not necessarily the business management. So the financial statements and the accounting and the marketing and that sort of thing. So business skills vis-a-vis the talent that you're selling to the market is another challenge. And also, I mean, markets are very different within Europe, within Latin America, within Africa. So that definition of MSME also varies greatly. And so financial institutions really have to understand the needs of their clients, not only from a micro, small, medium perspective, as Liz was clarifying, but also what challenges these subsegments face. So knowledge, management skills, not only financial products, but really the financial literacy and financial education that accompanies the growth of a business. So in order for a financial institution to really be able to cater to the needs of MSMEs, they have to take into consideration these additional services that can support businesses grow. Liz, I see you have your...
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to pick up on that word that you used, talent. And I think we've got to do a lot more to build confident small businesses that understand we have the talent. We are the talent that comes up with the ideas, that helps to create jobs, that works for with the bigger businesses in order to fuel their success. And so therefore, we have the right to the respect for our role within the economy and the supply chains and so on. And therefore, we should ask for the help that we need, because it is out there. It's just hugely difficult to navigate the myriad of sources of help and support. And I think that perhaps we need to make a much better system platform through which that support, the right support at the right time for the right business, can be accessed much more easily.
Okay, thanks very much, Liz, and Jason. Thank you for joining us. You're very welcome to join the panel. We're still really just talking about the obstacles for much smaller businesses, and Liz and Liliana have been sort of very clear that they have a two-woman campaign. I don't know if you want to join this campaign, three-person campaign, to really separate small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises and not lump them all together. So firstly, maybe your thoughts on that, but also just your general views on the key obstacles really affecting this market.
Well, I certainly agree that we have an incredibly flexible, talented, creative pool of people, and I think there's both. COVID has been a real issue, but it's also created an unprecedented opportunity for new business ideas. If you look through the lens of the banks, the big banks are woefully underserving this market. There's been a period since the financial crisis, 2007 and 8, where they've denuded skill sets, they've removed distribution, and their objective has been about cost cutting and not about understanding. I was reading Liz's profile about her father and her grandfather, and I share that I've been in this market for 36 years. Businesses need people to build relationships, to understand the nature of their objectives. There's continuity, there's access to people. You don't go through call centres. So if you're a micro business, and obviously you've got that equity funding gap issue at the very early stage, because you've got a great idea, but invariably a lot of entrepreneurs can't finance it that easily. But it is so much more difficult now to have a sensible conversation with the big banks than before. And I think that's where I recognise really, the whole premise of why we feel it's important to serve that sector better. The other thing, Owen, sometimes we forget the SME segment makes up 52% of our economy. It's 99% of all employers and over 60% of all employment in the UK. It is the most important sector bar none. And yet, what a time and attention does it get? It doesn't have the big lobby groups, the Federation of Small Business, the former private business. They do a decent job. But, I think it's high time that we gave these smaller businesses more time and energy and priority. They are the backbone of our economy, plain and simple.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, you mentioned earlier on the impact of the pandemic. I was wondering if you could delve into that a little bit deeper, and it'd be great to hear Liz and Liliana's thoughts on that as well. But Jason, maybe your initial thoughts.
Yeah, so I think COVID has been the equivalent of a heart attack for our economy. So I actually think, in fairness to the government, they've done a pretty good job in terms of the stimulus, the support, the furlough, the bounce back loans, the CBILS. There's been a whole array of stimulus, which I think has been incredibly helpful and acted as a really positive cushion. I think the difficulty going forward is some of the support systems, I believe, have drifted a little bit. So let me give you an example. The local enterprise companies, the old business links. We used to see a lot of stimulus and support. I think it's a little bit harder now than it used to be to, even things like local authority grants, training support, stimulus, local grants, for IT investment, those sort of things. So I think COVID has created a marvellous opportunity. We'll see more great ideas coming to market, more new businesses started in people's kitchen table, and particularly around technology and being able to scale, because the barriers to entry are so much lower now because of the innovation around technology. So I think it's exciting. I also think there's a challenge. There's a challenge on how we support those businesses. They've probably over leveraged a little bit. They've took bounce back loans. They've got leverage probably beyond where they should have done, but it was a necessity to survive. How are we going to support those businesses? Can we provide more tolerance, more understanding? And some of the new entrants that came in and offered bounce back loans with those government guarantees, I think it'll be interesting to see how they support those businesses as well, because some of them haven't got the infrastructure at the back end yet. So that will be interesting. But I'm an eternal optimist, Owen. So I see we're coming out at the end of COVID, and I just see positivity and opportunity.
Okay, thank you. We've actually had an audience question, which is, along these lines. How has the pandemic changed the needs of micro enterprises in terms of banking? What do they need now? So, Liz and Liliana, maybe Liz, starting with you, if you have any initial thoughts on that question.
Yes, it's been really interesting because on the one hand, I agree with what Jason says. Absolutely, there's lots of opportunity out there, and on the one hand, we did see 400,000 small businesses start up in the first 5 months of this year. We could be seeing a record 1 million within the year. So there's lots of people with lots of bright ideas out there. Whether they will get the funding they need at the right time from the right source, again, is the big question. I think talking to Business Deadline, and Business Deadline is the only charity in the UK that deals with small business customers, they are finding that a lot of the customers coming to them in debt are saying they did take bounce back loans, but they tried not to spend them. It's only coming out of COVID, if we are indeed coming out of COVID, that they've started to spend them. So there is a question on, if we do have to go back into restrictions, what will the government come forth with in terms of support? Because those firms for whom it wasn't a natural thing to do, and small firms hate having to borrow like that, will there be another tranche of help that will help them to support them back through that? But there is that perfect storm building of business rates and deferrals, what they called payment holidays, which weren't really holidays at all. there is a lot of forbearance on the parts of the banks and the various lenders, but how long will that last? So we may not see the worst of it coming into this winter, but we may see, and I am an eternal optimist, Jason, but I still think there's a few hard times to go through before we get there. One of the other problems that Business Deadline is citing is the fact that people have used their household money in order to finance the business, because if you don't finance the business, there's nothing coming in. And so there's a lot of people in debt with their finances. But one of the biggest issues that has come up is the late payment problem. Now, you won't be surprised to hear me say this, but late payment covers a multitude of sins. And I'm not just talking about overdue invoices. I'm talking about, pay when I'm paid, pay when you're published or sold, retentions, all sorts of amendments to contracts, 120 days payment terms. I've even heard 360 days payment terms. Now, some of the big businesses did their best to get money into the small business, their small suppliers' bank accounts as quickly as possible. It can be done, but there's still, on the other hand, a lot of payments outstanding simply because other firms, medium-sized firms, small firms, were worried about paying their other suppliers because they themselves were worried that they were facing financial difficulty. So there's a lot there that has to be unpicked and understood. And I don't think we know where we are yet, which means that the banks who have been lending don't quite know what the degree of forbearance is that they're going to need to apply. And so, there's a lot to work through the system there, I think.
Okay, thank you. Liliana, maybe your thoughts, maybe a bit of a broader perspective, more an international perspective.
Yes, no, thank you. And just to give some numbers, and I am an internal optimist, but I don't know about COVID, if I'm so optimist, let's say. And I'm just going to throw some numbers. According to World Bank estimates, 119 to 124 million people are now poor as a result of COVID. So the level of poverty in the world has increased in this year and a half, almost 2 years. And 1.8%, based on McKinsey research, are women. So women are more affected, particularly, those that are running their businesses, by COVID, because they have taken on additional responsibilities in their households, such as being a school teacher, right? When you have your child at home or your children at home, I have 3 children, for example, and they're online learning, and, your juggling becomes quite different to a standard juggling that women face. So women-owned businesses are suffering greatly due to COVID. And just to answer the question, Owen, on what changes or what additional needs are resulting from COVID for MSMEs, I would say payment systems. So in many countries, and particularly countries that had very strict lockdowns, like in LATAM, Argentina, Colombia, to name a few, and people could literally not leave their house. If you were running a business and did not have an online payment system, then your business was dead. Right. So, fintechs that were in the payment space really gained market share during COVID. And if you were that business who did not have this payment capacity for your customer, right, for your customer to buy your good digitally and for you to deliver that good in a new business model, if you weren't able to adapt quickly, then those businesses greatly suffered. I think the one benefit that COVID has brought to the market is the real realization that digitalization is a basic need that the financial sector has to undertake, and that the MSME sector has to undertake in order to really survive. Now it's about survival. I'm not sure we're over COVID. I hope we are. It depends on where you sit. If you're sitting in Sudan or in Chad, COVID isn't over. If you're sitting in Europe, well, you're much better off. So it's really relative in terms of where we are in the pandemic and how we're going to recuperate. And that, of course, affects the SMEs that are operating in the different countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I just come back on one point that Liz made? And again, I think I totally endorse all these points. But one of the interesting observations, if you think about small businesses, they've had this terrible latent period where they've not been able to trade. I agree with Liliana. those that have digitised or have an online-led approach actually have done rather well. There's some very notable successes, but most small businesses are not. They might have a website, they might have they might have online e-commerce capability, but a lot of them, it's pretty basic stuff. It's not, they can suddenly migrate the whole business to a digital kind of distribution model. So generally they've suffered in this period, and hence why those government stimulus has been so key. But just think about it from a small business person's perspective. Let's say I run a local pub, or I've got a convenience store or whatever. Any of my perishables, I've had to get rid of them. I've had to, either give them away or write them off because they've gone off, frankly. And now I'm seeing the fledgling signs. I'm working central London. I'm now seeing, where I can't get a seat on the tube again. That's been a while since I've seen that. But I'm a small business. I'm starting to see some return demand. I don't think demand patterns are back to where they were, but they are getting back. And there's an awful dilemma for a small business. I've now got to fund all my stock and all my trading working capital. And am I going to get the demand pattern that I used to get? What a lot of businesses are seeing is they're restocking, and it may be credit cards or personal savings. It may be business support, so bank support. But there's still this twilight zone where we're not quite hitting the demand pattern, but we have to restock and rebuild our business. And that actually, from a cash flow perspective, is a more difficult time than the COVID period. So I definitely do not trivialise the challenges of COVID, but I do see the incredible creativity where people suddenly divert their production to sanitizer production, in the early stage, or, everybody's creative. And I think our SME sector, because it's so hard to run businesses and 70% of them fail new starts in the first 3 years, this is a vocation. This is not for the light-hearted. This is tough, to be successful. So I think there are still some challenges, but I do believe that out of this we'll see a lot of really positive enterprises in the longer run. But we'll still have turbulence in the next few months for sure.
Sure. Thank you. Liz, I think you're looking to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in the supply chain issues, because it's not just a question of restocking; it's a question of, can I restock? Can I get the labour in order to supply the demand? And so it's the double whammy is coming through. But interestingly, Jason, you're talking about the opportunities coming through, and I was talking to someone in Northern Ireland yesterday, who was saying that the local businesses in Northern Ireland are going direct to the big supermarkets and saying, we may not be able to get the goods in from the UK, from the rest of the UK, but we can supply you directly. And I wonder how much there will be a shift to some localization as opposed to globalization, because if you can use a van to get your products into a local supermarket, you can sell them.
Absolutely.
My big concern is farmers having to throw milk down the drain, and that is happening at the moment because the tankers can't arrive. We've all seen the stories about pigs being culled. I'm not sure if the cull has happened yet, but as a farmer's daughter, I know only too well the hardships that bring if you can't sell your products. Businesses like that on and off. What can the banks do to support? Are we likely to see further government support needed simply because this has got to work itself through? And it will, but it's got to work itself through. We shouldn't forget that there were about 3 million micro businesses that didn't get any support through the COVID system. We lost 750,000 freelancers out of the market, partly because of that. The average amount of time a freelancer worked during the COVID pandemic was 10 hours a week, because that's all the work that they could get. So there's an awful lot of rebuilding has got to go on there. So, and banks do, in the main, they may not trust banking, but they trust their own banks. And so it is the place they go to at an initial stage for that advice and information. And if it isn't forthcoming, then that's particularly hard to deal with.
Okay, thanks, Lillian. I think you had a point to come in there. I would like to move on to women and BAME-owned businesses in a second, picking up on a point you made earlier. But Lillian, if you have a quick thoughts
No,
on.
yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, and really the liquidity levels that we're seeing in the banking sector globally, quite honestly, just demonstrates that that risk appetite is extremely not towards supporting MSMEs, because at the end of the day, if a bank is liquid, it means they're not lending, right? There's no intermediation in the market, and that really says a lot in terms of, okay, we're all kind of in a wait and see mode, and particularly the financial sector is in such a mode, and in really offering new credit or it's we're not in a growth stage, let's say, so it's really negatively affecting MSMEs.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
can I just very quick? Sorry, Owen, I've just got to come in because Recognise most certainly is in growth mode, and we are connecting with businesses. One of the things about liquidity, Liana, not to disagree, but just to build on what you're saying, there has been an unprecedented level of saving during COVID. We have seen so the personal um, the pool of personal savings in the UK historically pre-COVID was about 1.5 trillion. It's now almost £2 trillion. So that liquidity naturally flows its way through the banks. But I totally agree with your analysis that a lot of the big banks have taken up a portion of their SIBLs and bounced back, and they're not in the market. They have no interest. They don't want to build relationships. They don't want to understand small business. They simply do not have appetite right now. I totally accept that. But I do think the liquidity has been slightly distorted by the unprecedented level of saving that we've seen during COVID.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on, and as I mentioned, it was a comment Liliana mentioned earlier about women-owned businesses, and I think we all know that women-owned businesses and BAME, Black and minority ethnic businesses, find it very hard, often the hardest to raise financing. I was just wondering if it'd be great to hear your thoughts on, well, firstly why that is, but secondly, what can be done to improve that situation. Liz, I don't know if you have any initial thoughts on that.
Yes, I think it's worth pointing out that minority-owned businesses, as they tend to be called, contribute about 74 billion a year to the UK economy. They're an extremely important part of the UK economy, and employ. One of the roughly 6 million small businesses in the UK is run by a minority owner, and they employ up to 3 million people. So we're not talking about a small section of the community here. Women-owned businesses before the pandemic were setting up faster rate than anywhere else. And also we need to think about the contribution made by owners of businesses with disabilities, with neurodivergence. We have got huge diversity across the sector. I'm going to let Liliana go into this in more detail because you've got the figures. But for me, it is back to that lack of understanding of the individual needs of all of those. And I don't think our support organisations are particularly well geared for inclusivity. We talk about diversity, but actually it's the inclusivity that matters. There's no point in inviting somebody along to get business support if you then can't include them in the business support that you deliver because you haven't thought through their needs. And I think we're guilty of that. I think probably on the advice and support sector and on the mentoring sector, it can be really difficult to get mentors who really understand your culture, your needs, your diversity. And that in itself is something we need to work on.
Yeah, thank you. Liliana, maybe you can take it up from there.
No, thank you, Owen. And so we at IFC, we have a program, Banking on Women program, that is specifically focused on gender finance and inclusivity, as you say, Liz. And basically, the way we see it is the women MSMEs are a subsegment of SMEs, and women act differently than men in terms of the financial decisions they make, the risk appetite they have, their customer loyalty, the fact that they prefer the personal relationships, and the fact that in many cases they are the decision maker of their household. There are a lot of single women making decisions not only for their immediate family, but for their extended family, their parents. And so we're talking about, the traditional financial products that go all the way from a credit card to a mortgage to a pension and insurance. So we firmly believe at IFC that we are working with financial institutions to understand the demand of this subsegment and to really adapt their products and services to serve this subsegment, because at the end of the day, and I really don't mean to put men down in any way. It's just different characteristics and different behavior that lead to different risk profiles. And also, one area that we're working on is internally to our financial institutions, and it varies greatly within countries, the attitude that the bank staff personnel have towards women in making credit decisions, in the treatment, in customer service. So we also offer advisory services, for example, in gender intelligence trainings and helping banks train their staff in attending to the women market segments.
That's great. Thank you. Jason, any thoughts on that
Yeah.
topic at all?
Well, firstly, at my level, because obviously, we try to influence positively across the bank. So the first thing is diversity inclusion is critical. So I'm very, very proud at the incredibly diverse and talented group of people that I work with. I've got a 31-year-old female Colombian CTO who is the most bright person I've ever worked with. She's just a little rocket and she's fantastic. So I think this is about meritocracy. When you look about people, you're not really caring about gender, ethnicity, or any other characteristic. All you're interested in who's the best to deliver the best outcomes. I think when it comes to our shareholders, my single biggest shareholder, Ruth Parasol's a self-made billionaire, and she's passionate about supporting women and minorities. She's done a whole raft of different things. But it is about understanding the buying behaviour is different. I totally agree with you, Liliana, the pressures and drivers. I also, it's a bit of a generalisation, but I think some of the softer skills in my team, I notice in my females, they are much more empathetic. They can be much more tolerant and understanding, come up with conciliatory outcomes, So I'm in this stereotype that doesn't underpin this, because I'm a middle-aged white man, which isn't probably the most objective to be calling it out, but we care passionately in terms of Black and minority and minority ethnic individuals and businesses. Again, I've had the most wonderful experience. I've been in banking 36 years. Some of the best entrepreneurs I've ever worked with are Indian entrepreneurs, particularly people that came from Kenya with £10 and a suitcase in the pocket, and they've built the most wonderful enterprises over many years and multiple generations. So for me, it's a rainbow. Who's got the talent? Who's got the capability? Embrace everybody, embrace talent wherever you find it, and be the best you can be.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. We've talked a lot about what banks can be doing and what what they can be doing in terms of trying to solve this issue. But what about regulators? What about governments? What about policymakers? Can we maybe take a step back and how can they be creating positive change in this area? Liz, maybe coming to you on this point.
I think we're all in this game together. There are things that the government can do. There are things the regulators can do. It takes a long time to make change if you're waiting for legislative change. And so I think there are lots of things that the industry can do, that I can do. I'm pushing for what I call ethical regulation. Now, one of the things that we do at the Office of the Small Business Commissioner is administer the prompt payment code. It's a voluntary code, but it is a code that says we commit to paying 95% of our small suppliers, at least 95% of our small suppliers, within 30 days. Now, if you think you're going to sign up to the code because that's it's the right thing to do, and it's a sign of an ethical business, then we'll help and support you to do that. So I think we can do much more by pushing that ethical message. Investors want to invest in ethical businesses. People coming out of universities and further education colleges want to work for ethical businesses. And I think that the payments issue should be on the governance agenda. It should be part of the ESG measures. It also should be part of social measures in the ESG measures, because if you are paying your small businesses, particularly your micro businesses and your sole traders, within a local economy as quickly as possible, and by that I mean you wouldn't walk into the butcher and order your Christmas turkey, go back and collect it and say, I'll pay you at Easter. It just doesn't work that way. And we are doing that with our small businesses. That's what we're expecting, them to wait for 4 months to get paid. Now, if we can get that velocity of cash moving around the system much better and quicker and effectively, then we will do something to help the underperforming of the economy. So we can all do something. But what I do think is the traditional banks are still up there on the list of favourite banks. If you do that research, the big banks are all there, the traditional banks. There is only one challenger on there in the top 10. So the challengers, and this is over to you, Jason, there's a role there for you too. Certainly the government and the regulators, of course, we're talking to them all the time. The lobby groups are talking to them all the time about what they can do more of and better and more quickly. But I just think we've all got to work together in this to work out how best, and it comes back to understanding the differences, the different behaviours, the different cultures, the different mindsets of all of those business groups, and how we can best serve them.
Well, yeah, Jason, I mean, coming from a perspective as a challenger bank, maybe you could offer some thoughts here.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Owen. Well, the first thing I would say is that I don't think we get the best experience that we can for micro and SMEs because we've got an oligopoly, and an oligopoly is not particularly great for customer outcomes. So when we've got the 5 biggest banks having a kind of stranglehold of the market, and there are factors in here like inertia. I do not understand, frankly. Let me give you a quick example. I do not understand why over £400 billion of savings is getting 1 basis point interest rate. That's 1/100th of 1%, and they didn't move away from the big banks. Why people stay and get such I can pay 200 times more than that. I don't understand that. And so I'm trying to communicate and offer up better alternatives and give people better value for money. But I would say, just in terms of balance, of course, I'd like to see that oligopoly loosened. But I do pay tribute to the regulator, particularly the PRA and the FCA, because we've seen the new startup bank unit, which I think has been very effective. Our experience has been very, very good. And also, I see the PRA with the New and Growing Banks initiative. These are really positive steps to try to help new fledgling banks like Recognise to build a foothold, because it is very difficult to compete with monolithic organisations that have been around for 100 plus years, and they're so embedded. But the key for me is convincing consumers and businesses, small businesses, there is an alternative. We're not all as bad as each other. There is no point doing nothing, because what's the point? I'm spinning plates. I'm a busy entrepreneur. I've got more to worry about. But there is an alternative, and I think new technology, a real focus on relationship, a real passion and real a care and instinct for small business, we will start turning the tide. It takes a while. We've been going for 2 months, Liz. They've been going, some of them, for 300 years. We're up for the battle, that's for sure.
Absolutely, but it can take 30 years to change human behaviour. So you've got quite a bit still to come. Yes.
Great. And Liliana, I don't know if you have any thoughts on what role governments and policymakers and regulators.
Thanks, Owen. I think the government plays a huge role, and I'll give you an example in terms of regulation. Things like the promotion of open banking that was born in the UK, and really it was to increase transparency in the payment system, right? And really promote competition and give customers the rights to their data and to get the best service based on that data information, which, data is important. Things like consumer protection, things around cybersecurity, and really promoting the development of the digital ecosystem for the benefit of the end consumer. And the government really is fundamental in promoting these kinds of initiatives where, using the cloud, electronic signatures, digital onboarding, digital KYC, these kinds of things that protect the consumer and makes their life easier in terms of obtaining financial services, particularly for MSMEs who really don't have the time to go and spend time at a bank branch to sign KYC and go through a long paper-based onboarding. So the government is really, in their role is promoting these kinds of digital approaches to really standardize and protect the consumer, but also, make their lives easier in terms of obtaining financial services, while at the same time protecting their resources.
And can I just quickly come in, Owen? I was just going to say the unicorns, the fintech in the UK is the envy of the whole of Europe. Nobody in Europe is achieving what the UK is achieving by way of fintech startups and value creation. So I agree, Liliana, but I would give the government some credit here. We are seeing real progress in the UK. The fintech market is growing at an incredible speed. And, I barely keep up with the unicorns. There seems to be more unicorns than I can count these days, which is great for the UK enterprise. It's great for the consumer ultimately. And as you rightly said, when you were talking about payments, these fintechs have come into their own during COVID. They really have. So, I think the government can always do more, but I actually think the UK financial services industry is in very, very good shape.
Okay,
And
thank you, Liz.
Owen, I wouldn't disagree with that. But to come back to a point that Jason made earlier, there are still about 1.2 million small businesses using their personal current accounts to run their businesses from. There are still about 2.5 million small businesses that are not really digital and using digital tools. They don't understand open banking and what it can do for them. And it's around about the government is doing a great job on all of that. But how do we engage with really tiny, poor, small businesses to get these messages through? We need to show them the benefits of what it is we're giving them. And Jason, I'm sure you're absolutely trying to nail that one. But it is extremely difficult to engage with firms that are simply so busy just trying to make a living and trying to do what they're passionate about doing. And that's where the business acumen point that Liliana made really early on. We need to do what we can to build confident businesses that are happy to ask the questions, but know where to get the help from, know how to ask the questions. And I think I would just like to see some work on that support that is available. It's all there, but it needs somehow or other to be brought much more simply and easily to the businesses that need it when they need it at the right time.
Can I add one more thing, Owen, to
Yeah.
I guess contribute? Because we're talking, there's been a lot
These
of.
are going to be the last comments, but please do go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to tie it into the title of this event, actually, Banking Revolution, and what Jason and Liz have been saying in terms of, the old traditional financial players. And I think the government really in promoting innovation, such as open banking in the UK and the establishment of fintechs and the development of the ecosystem really disrupts the financial sector. Really, these kinds of technological solutions and providers such as fintechs have been able to gain market share because the traditional banking sector has been very comfortable towards the MSME sector. And so their revolution in terms of really introducing innovative business models, approaches, and products have made the financial institutions, the more traditional ones, wake up and say, we have to do something. We have to partner with fintechs. And I'm not saying they're going to, fintechs are going to take over the financial sector, but really new business models and the traditional players have really realized, particularly during COVID, that if they don't really adapt and introduce innovative approaches, channels, products, partnerships, they're going to die. They will be the Kodaks of the world.
Okay, well, thanks very much. That was a really, I think, very interesting and provocative point to end on. We have run out of time. It's flown by, but I'd like to thank all my panelists this morning for contributing to such an interesting discussion. I would also like to thank the audience for your considered questions. I'm afraid we only got to ask one or two of them, but we had some more really good ones come up. And I'd like to remind you that the session will be available on demand on the event website for 30 days. Please stay tuned for the next session, which is a fireside chat with Sopnendu Mahanti, Chief FinTech Officer at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, who is in conversation with Kimberly Long, the banker's Asia editor. And that is all that's left for me to say is thank you very much again and goodbye.